There we go.
Hi, John, and we're good. All right, so it's 6 o'clock on Monday, the 17th of May, and this is the Board of Ed Budget, Finance, and Operations Committee meeting. And let's go ahead and just jump right in, and we'll start with the RPS insurance renewal and budgeting process.
Yeah, so I'll just start quickly. You might remember that during one of our Board of Education / Board of Selectmen meetings, I can't exactly remember which one, but there was a conversation around why are we only finding out our insurance increase now, right? That was generally what the conversation.
I think that was me, yes.
It may have been you, Sean. I have a lot of one-liners for yours. That may have been one of them, but and at that time we shared that Rob Fitzpatrick, who presents Brown and Brown Insurance, provides a structure for us initially in the fall, and then that works its way through the spring. And so the question was really like, why is this? Can we have more information? And I remembered that. So I thought that this was a good time when things were settling a little bit to have Rob come and explain the process and provide a little bit more context so that we're all on the same page.
Yep.
Okay, Rob, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Hello, everyone. This is not an uncommon question. This question actually came up at the Ridgefield Board of Education meeting probably 6-7 years ago also. So every time a fairly new board starts to come in and ask the same question, we tend to go over it again. So this is just a refresher. And I'm sure we'll end up, as we work together in the future, we'll be speaking about this again for future board members as well. First and foremost, Brown & Brown has been with this, the Board of Education for more than 10 years now. And I think we've had a very successful run. We've managed the claims cost and renewal cost, and as well as the negotiations process for your collective bargaining units very well. And we have a great relationship with the employees as well. They know we're acting in their interest and making sure that we fight the insurance companies' sometimes erroneous administrative hassles. So we do our best, and we are working very hard every day to make sure that we're delivering the best health plan at the lowest possible cost. So with that being said, let me give everybody just a 10,000 foot overview. Your budgeting process starts when Dawn makes that phone call in October. And that phone call to me is, okay, Rob, we're getting ready to gear up. Let's start getting the numbers together. Please understand that your renewal, your plan anniversary, is actually in July. So we're looking at almost 9 months of future projection in advance in order to get a number that is realistic for you to budget off of. Now, we've been doing this a long time, so we generally know what's going on. Unfortunately, this past year, we were faced with a 1 in 100 year dilemma. What do we do about the impact of COVID? So understand that when we look at the claims cost and we're making a projection for your July renewal, our plan anniversary had just started in July. So we have July's claims, August claims, and maybe September claims. Because remember, the claims are reported usually 30 to 45 days after the month has ended. So I take that information and I aggregate it with older data. Now, when I project out the cost, I have to project out cost with medical cost inflation, also known as medical trend. Okay. Trend typically runs or is running around 8.5% for our type of benefit program, our high deductible health plan. So not only do I have to take that, but I have to go back and look at all the months back to carry that forward. So I'm looking at more than 15 to 18 months of claims experience, and I'm projecting that forward to get us to that July 2021 anniversary period. So when I give you a projection, your initial projection that I give you is a no worse than number. Always will be. And that's the way it has to be, because the insurance company, they're on the hook for the claims. They're not going to give us an aggressive out the door number. My job from when I get that first number is to continuously look at and project out those claims, report back to Dawn, we're doing well, we're not doing well. If we're doing well, then we want to get another month of claim in so I can reduce that trend number down and cut that trend number off for so many months. If we're not doing well, well then, hey, we want to stop and we want to accept that renewal right away. We've been fortunate to run on very good claims experience past couple of years now. Okay, so I want to delay that number as long as I can and capture that good claims experience, reduce those projected trend numbers. Think of it like this. If your budget has to be settled in February, I have to guess the rest of February, March, April, May, June claims in order to get you to a July number. So I'm doing my best to project that number, but I'm also looking at how much of those claims are coming in so that I can reduce that projection, that thought process that I have with actual real data, and removing out the inflationary numbers that I have to add to it. In addition, this past year, we had to add in what we call COVID trend. This is trend that had to account for claims whereby during the shutdown period, March, April, May, June, people did not go to the doctor. Services were delayed, put off. And in a lot of cases, we have to get ready to pay for those services going into 2021 and into 2022. So we have to take a shot at that. Now, fortunately, as the vaccinations started coming out, we started refining our trend projection for the COVID. And we started reducing it. And we got it down really low. So it's really almost a non-factor, but it has to be accounted in there. So when I'm giving you a number, and that first initial number that I'm telling Dawn and Susie is November-ish, right around there, it's going to be a high number. It's a no worse than number. When I get to February, we're about where we're going to be unless we have really positive claims experience. And then I could start knocking off additional claims dollars. Dawn and I were talking about this, and here's a great example. And Dawn, this is the example you and I talked about earlier. When I started working with municipalities more than 20 years ago here in Connecticut, one of the first groups I walked into was a regional school district. And at the time, I was representing the teachers union. Many of you don't know that. I used to represent the NEA Ridgefield. And that was years ago. As they say, I went to the dark side, but we'll figure that out later. So I was in one of the regional school districts, and we were having negotiations. And then these negotiations were taking place in late June. And I'm looking at the number and I'm saying, this number is incredibly high. It's a 25% increase. And I asked the question of the broker and the HR director, why did you accept a 25% increase? And they said, we accepted that in February because our claims experience was so bad for the past couple of months. I said, did you bother to look at the claims going forward? And they said, no, we closed it out in February. I said, I understand for budgets, I get it. But what you want to do is you want to leave it as a budget line item or placeholder, but continue to look at the numbers. Those claims improved 50% from January to June. Their number should have been a 12% increase. They grossly overpaid. And fortunately for the insurance company, they got a lot of profit. So at the next year's renewal, when that came around, you figure, okay, great. They had great claims experience January to June. That's probably going to help us out next year's number. What happened was they ended up getting bad claims experience in August, September, October, November. They were back in the same boat. They never got a break from those costly claims. Coincidentally, the union put them in a position whereby the union was unwilling to pay for the extra 12 or 13% of the cost. So I never want to put the employees in a position where they're paying extra. I never want to put the taxpayer in a position where they're paying extra. I know Rudy gets mad at me a lot of times when I come out with a number and it's a conservative number. But at the end of the day, all I'm doing is giving you the best opportunity to be in the best position to get the lowest possible renewal. This is no secret. I don't like insurance companies. I worked for them. I worked for the pharmacy companies. I worked for third-party administrators. I learned all their tricks. so that I can do what I do now and turn it back on them and use their own information against them to get the best rates possible. I don't know if you realized the past couple of years, our renewal has been single digits. We had one bad year in about 5. And prior to the first 7 years I was here, 8 years I was here, our total increase over 8 years was 1.7%. That's unheard of. That's because I don't want to give them any excess money. We can use that better for educational items. 1 year we got a decrease. We were able to put in the kindergarten. That was with Superintendent Lowe when she was here. And that was one of the items that, because we're saving so much money on healthcare, you can do other programs. And I get it. I get the process. I'm sorry that it doesn't come out until very late, but the bottom line is I'm doing what's in the interest of the board, and I want to deliver that. I'm going to continue to deliver that. If there's something I can do better or a different way, I'll do it. I'm more than open to hearing what you would like. But when I give you that number, it's a no worse than number. We're going to refine it as we go along and come up with a bottom line number that we can deliver to the Board of Finance so that there's no question. This is the number we need. Any questions on that?
Thank you. Are there any? Sean?
Well, more commentary than question. If we find ourselves explaining this year after year, maybe there's something wrong. That's an observation. But secondly, more than once in recent history has the Board of Ed budget, or actually the district budget, shown a significant deficit that was all of a sudden covered by miraculous insurance savings. And the fact that that's happened more than once definitely gives me pause. So we're explaining this again, tells me something's wrong. And the not to exceed number is problematic for me at face value. I deal with, in the business world, giving high budget numbers that you can then exceed and use that savings to show miraculous things is troubling.
Okay, well, I just want to give you an update to your comment. The reason why we go over this multiple times is because we have new members of the Board of Education that come in every couple of years. So there are a lot of new faces on the board that I have to explain this to. Jonathan, you may have been first on the board when I first explained this a couple of years back. And most of the folks here today are fairly new, I would imagine, within the last 2 cycles.
But Rob, a lot of us have real world business experience, deal with insurance issues year in and year out, not to mention our own household insurance stuff. And again, I will reiterate, the fact that you had to explain this again tells me there's something wrong at the root.
Sean, can I just ask a question? What's your ask, if you have one?
My ask is we solve how to not have to have a high estimate that we then exceed miraculously, and that we figure out the timing. Ken, you're in insurance. You acknowledge that there's a challenge there. How do we solve that?
Well, I think there's 2 parts to that. One, the explanation, the need for the explanation, I think is because it partly driven by the fiscal year concept, and then how we're budgeting. Because I think
my company's fiscal year is November 1st. It's not just January. I get it.
Sure.
There's a solution here. There are virtually
I agree
half
with that.
the companies don't have a January 1 fiscal year. So start there.
Agreed. That's something that Rob would have to address. But I think that's part of where the need to explain is because of the way that the process has been set up, and the reason that it needs to be different is because of the school year. So July 1st begins the next year, which is why. So that's a little piece that I hadn't clicked for me yet. So I think that's the challenge, is trying to budget so much in advance. When we do a normal business budget, we're not trying to get 9-month projections out. Not that we're baking into the numbers. Obviously, you're doing multi-year projections out. And I think that's where the challenge is coming, is trying to get to that solid number. I think maybe we could revisit the, no worse than, how conservative is conservative? Are we being too conservative? Which then leads to I think the problem that you're discussing, Sean, is where, finding, $30,000-$40,000 of savings is a lot different than finding, several $100,000 of savings.
Or $1 million in the case of this year.
But COVID, the million's a little bit of an exception, I think. I would like to think that's an outlier.
It's happened before, Ken. Be clear.
So one thing that another local district has done recently this year was their superintendent's proposed budget that they presented to the Board of Education was X% plus or minus whatever insurance ends up being. So their budget presentation did not include a placeholder not to exceed.
Also, Sean, I want to also have you look at this. This is, I guess you can look at this as a business, but it's not, because our money comes from tax charges. If we're short, where do we get the money from? Do we fire people? Do we cut programs? I can't be short. I have to be very conservative in my approach when I come into setting the initial budgets for you. All I could tell you is it is going to be the no worse than number, but as we go along, we're cutting that number, cutting that number, cutting that number.
I get
If
it,
we
Rob.
if we come in and that number goes up, where do you get the money?
I get it, Rob, but I work in, let's say, a project management oriented environment. And everybody along that value chain gives a worst case scenario. What happens if I open the box and it bursts into flames and I have to order new stuff and we start all over and we end up with an inflated figure that at the end of the day, somebody's delighted about. But in the case of a municipal budget, that's disastrous.
Can I ask just
yes.
one question, and it may be because we'll just argue that I'm a rookie. The number that we received, like in this particular case this year, we received it before our, and this is actually more of a question for my board. We received that number before we actually received the Board of Finance number. Has that not been in the case in the past? In other words, this year it worked out, right? Our worst case number that Rob gave us, luckily for us, the number was lower, and that because we had a worst case, and for the Board of Finance having to make some decisions on a school board's budget, they knew that number close-ish, right? Pretty close, before they were able to make that decision. Has that always been the case? Because if it is, then it doesn't impact as negatively as one would think. If for some reason it's later than that time, then it's exactly the concern that Sean is expressing, right? I mean, it's just another way to look at it. So Rob, that number, when do we actually for sure get our final number?
Typically sometime in late March, early April.
So I know this time, for example, we were pushing on that number hard because we wanted to be sure we had it in preparation for our Board of Finance meeting. Is there ever a time in our community or others where that number may come after? Because then it would be problematic, just as Mr. McAvoy described.
No, we're at some point we have to close out the negotiations with the vendor. Part of the process also that comes into play that's an outlier is that we have some retirees and we have a separate coverage for those retirees because we wanted to eliminate a lot of our OPEB liability. So we moved them to a fully insured plan, got them off the group policy. And we moved them to a fully insured plan with Amwins. That's on a calendar year basis. So we have, Dawn, was it 110 retirees on the Amwins?
Mm-hmm.
So we have 110 retirees on an Amwins plan, but that's a fixed cost rate. Those claims no longer impact this plan. So we were able to reduce the cost of the insurance plan, plus our future OPEB liability, which helps out. The other part is we have a July 1st effective date. Now, we have to figure out, and this is the guess, right? The guess is, okay, how many people are retiring and how many people are coming aboard? So that I have to work with Dawn's office and try to figure that out. And a lot of times we don't have that in February. We're getting it later on. So there's some adjustments there. And when you look at the total cost for a family unit, it's a pretty significant number. So that could impact it, especially if you have 5 more new hires. In the case, it could be $100,000 in total cost to the Board of Ed. So there's a lot of different moving parts here. What we've done over the past several years is we've consolidated our vendors, and we've consolidated a lot of the moving parts into one carrier. We now have moved everything under Anthem's umbrella for all the active employees. We moved those post-65 retiree folks to the AmWins plan. So we have them set up in silos, all right? And that was to really refine our number, get a multi-line discount, right? So you buy your medical, they're gonna give you a couple points off for dental, vision, et cetera. If we were to go in and say, okay, in February, I know the board has to give its initial budget. Okay, I'm gonna give you a number, but that number is going to be conservative. If you want a realistic number, we're getting closer into the second, third week of March, because now I'm taking claims in from January and February, from July to January, February. And we're refining that number and coming up with a more precise projection of our cost. This year was a little bit of a challenge due to the COVID impact, but you know what? I think we balanced it out well, and we ended up reducing a lot of the claims dollars that we projected going out, because more people were vaccinated or had the virus. And overall, we're not seeing as many claims coming up from the delay process that happened in March, April, May, June in 2020 come back and hurt us. So that was also a big part of the dip that you saw in the overall numbers as well. That's not going to happen next year. At least we hope it won't happen again next year. Nobody knows. I don't have a crystal ball. But the reality is this: I can't give you the sharpest number out the door. I just can't do it. Conservatively, I have to give you a number that is going to fit within the budget, that won't come back and say, hey, we're going to go up. The board of, I've been in front of the Board of Finance. I've explained this to them. Some of the folks that I've dealt with in the past on the Board of Finance, I've had to tell them, if you cut this anymore, you are cutting jobs or you are cutting programs. I personally told them that. So the objective here is to get you to a number that is not going to go up, but will come down. And as it comes down, either use it for whatever you use it for, or give it back to the town. You know, that's the best I can do for you. I cannot give you a precise number that's going to say, hey, your insurance is going to be $15,297,000. And I can say for certainly that it's going to come in at that. I don't know, because those claim dollars are fluctuating. I don't have a crystal ball, but we do give very good and very tight projections.
Rob, real quick, at any given month, you have 12 months of claims data.
Yes, we use 23 on this projection.
Okay, so you have at any given month, and you have 23 months of claims data. So,
Correct.
So explain how that fits into the process, because why are you unable to get an accurate quote with 23 months of data at any given time? We keep talking about having 4 months or 5 months or 6 months. We need one more month to make that number good, but we have the previous 23 months.
Because when I use those months going back, right, when we give the initial projection, we use 23. As we move forward, we're getting that down to 18 months, then 15 months. And we're reducing the trend that is built into the number, or the inflationary charge. So the further out, I have to use more trend. As we get closer, I use less. And in this case, not only did I use less trend, but I reduced, almost wiped out all of our COVID trend impact that was part of the projection this year. So that was a big underlying factor in the numbers dropping so much. When we give that projection, this past year was a little bit off, right? Mm-hmm. So March, April, May in 2020, nobody went to the doctor. There was no usage. Our claims utilization for dental went down to 0 at 1 month. So when we looked at that, this is all going to come back later on. It came back, but it came back in little increments, but it was spread into all these months in between. And when we started doing our claims analysis and the data mining, we saw those numbers popping up in there, a little bit higher than normal, but not anything that was blown out of proportion. So we're saying, okay, the members or the employees are utilizing the plan, their families are utilizing the plan all along as they get more freedom to go out to doctors or feel more comfortable to go to doctors. So we're using those numbers and projecting it and building into our pattern. Now, next year, if we were to come in, and let's say it is not a pandemic issue, you're not going to deal with a COVID trend number on the out the door number or the no worse than number. Coincidentally, we're going to be able to say, okay, now we have a snapshot. There's no underlying fluctuation in our claims. We have more of a solid 12 months of claims that are more up to date from a standpoint of the fluctuation with the virus. And we can project the claim going forward. We will know, though, in that projection, there is a certain amount of trend that is built in. So as we get closer, we're going to use a trend factor. Let's say it's 8.5%. So you're looking at 0.7% every month coming off of our projection going forward. So if you're looking at, 6 months, 4.2% could possibly come off if your claims continue to run below average from the time we give you that projection to the time the plan anniversary comes into play. However, we're not going to wait until June to finalize that number. We're going to finalize that number end of March, early April. And we know that that's a solid number. That's where we're going to be. If we're a little high, okay, it covers us for next year. If we're a little low, that's a problem.
But on that same token, though, the reverse could happen. So if the claims data keeps going up and up and up and up, then our premiums are going to increase.
No, because remember, I'm giving you a no worse than number. So Anthem comes back to me and says, hey, here's our number on a conservative basis. We're projecting out, we're using this trend, we're using this inflation. Here's the other impacts to it. Our team, Jay Fiorello, myself, we start to break down our underwriting. We're comparing it to Anthem's underwriting. Anthem, by the way, was a little bit more conservative than we were out the door because we felt that your claims are running well and they continue to run well. But you never know when that spike's going to come. We get one person with a $300,000 claim, it could be real troublesome for the budget. So we have to, be conservative and protect against that.
So basically, to put it bluntly and meaning no offense, you give a high estimate so that so it can only come down.
When I give you that estimate in December, that is the worst case scenario. It's not going to go higher than that. It will come down.
Right. But
when we get to the budget number in February, we've already chopped off a couple points off that initial number.
So if you're pretty confident that we're going to be chopping a couple points off every time, why would that not be the place that you want to start?
Because I don't know how much we're going to chop off that number.
That's right.
We get those updated claims.
Okay.
If I can just say a couple words, we can, as a board, choose to ask our superintendent to give us a budget X of any change in insurance and look at that separate in the future, not in December. We can look at that X of any change in educational budget, like some districts do. Another thing, to what a corporation can do that a board of education cannot do. There's two things that come to mind. One, a corporation can choose to spend more than they budgeted. We can't. Two, a corporation can choose to save money that was budgeted this year to use next year. That's another thing we can't do. So our budget is our budget for the year.
Jonathan, if I may, on your scenario where the superintendent would give you a budget without insurance, at what point does that budget have to include some insurance number?
That would be a good question. That would be a board discussion. But if if the outcome of this meeting is that the the Budget and Finance Committee has no faith in the December estimate for insurance, then we can say, let's look at it not until February, not until March, because if it's a worthless number, it's a worthless number. If we all see it as a not to exceed and we're all comfortable with it as a not to exceed, then that's fine too.
But Jonathan, the problem
By the
is
way-
you get it not to exceed, you come in with a number that's in, this year, because of the way the budget went down, that got caught up. In previous years, that was a wonderful end of year surprise to spackle over some problems the district had. And that was, I think, out of bounds. But we need to, if I'm reporting sales figures, I'm going to put a management spin on those, up or down. And I think we need to have that factor be built in, because if this year's budget had passed with that extra $1 million in there that didn't go to insurance, it would have been spent elsewhere. And I'm not confident that's the will of the constituents at that point. We have the ability to do that. It's legal to do that. I don't think it's correct.
No, ideally we would have a carryover account.
Ideally we would.
Just
Okay,
the last point, if I may, I think we had to be careful about, Rob, with all due respect, where you said, come January, you knock off 2%. And that's not always the
Good
case.
point.
Communities, and
Correct.
I'm a part of communities that you've supported and that not been the case. So the not to exceed is certainly, it makes me feel the most comfortable, because obviously we know that we can't exceed that number. I think for the benefit of what Sean is describing, so long as we have that number, this would be my point, is that so long as we have that number before we approach our Board of Finance, so that they can make the best decision possible with respect to what the Board of Education is asking for programming, then that makes the most sense. But I think we just need to be really cautious about all of a sudden thinking that this number is going to go down dramatically, because I've seen it not. And I just want us to be in a very comfortable position.
And
Yes, because I still do represent that other district where you worked at, and the claims went sideways.
That's right.
Year. And again, that no worse number is exactly what it is meant to be. No worse than. The carrier has committed that this is the maximum they will charge. That doesn't mean the number is always automatically going to go down. Most of the time it will, but there are some instances that it can go up because claims have really gone really south.
And the reality is that if you're looking at a 24-month period, while we may not pay the price now, we're going to be paying the price the following year.
Correct.
So
absolutely.
So, and it could be even now, right? With the number that we have, we can have all of a sudden now for the next 12 months ish, people are using the doctor, someone gets incredibly sick, knock on wood that they don't, for the reasons that we don't want them to, not because of the money. And ultimately we could be looking at a very different scenario next year. So I just want to caution us on a couple of those things.
Correct.
Right. Yeah. And I mean,
you hit the nail right on the head.
They're going to get their VIG. They're going to get their VIG one way or the other. So if they feel like they priced too low this year, they're going to pick that up the following year. So what about, so just expanding on Jonathan's idea, what about doing the Board of Ed budget through, I mean, because again, just for all of these reasons that we just mentioned, the number in October, November, December, that it is relatively meaningless. It might be spot on, it's probably high, probably going to be a lot lower. So if you're making budget decisions from a programming perspective based on the really high number, that's not really fair to you either, because you're already thinking of limiting the things that you're able to do in the district because you're worried about this not worse than.
Yeah, I think one thing that might be helpful, Ken, and maybe we can do this work, is it'd be nice to see what our let's just look at trends for the past 10 years, what our actual number was provided to us, what we budgeted for, and then what it actualized to, because then I think the board can make a decision on what makes sense for them, right? Is if we were budgeting 8% and then all of a sudden we got a number of 3% or something like that, which was the more likely scenario this year. I don't know if that's been the trend all along. And I think that that data would be important for us to see so that we can make a decision on what makes the most sense next.
But isn't that part of the budget process now? When you come to us with an insurance number, doesn't it already include sort of the historical, or is it should include but doesn't?
I don't think that, John, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that we've shown you data on this is the number that we budgeted for, and this is what was actualized in 2000. Here's what happened in 2001.
We may not have seen it, but that in my opinion, that should be considered before you put a budget number.
Well, this year, Ken, it appeared that the not to exceed number was what was in the budget. By the time it got to the Board of Finance, it got shaken out.
Right. We reached back to Rob to look at, and he does all of his scenarios and his processing of the information to give us that no more or the high number, whatever the number, no, not to exceed number for our budget.
No
and
worse,
that's what we put. No worse. Thank you.
So just to review, we voted on a budget that included that not to exceed number, all in, fully, fully weighted. And again, if that had gone to the voters and the town had voted for that, there would possibly have been $1 million slush fund out there to be redeployed to other stuff. And that has happened in previous years where they used that to spackle over some really bad stuff. And I called that lack of transparency at the time. And it was.
Would it be helpful if we had Brown and Brown do kind of a review of our numbers and bring that back to the board?
I think we need to rebuild the timeline and the process so we don't have to have this conversation every couple of years. Something's broken.
I think the timeline is the timeline. I don't know that we can change the timeline. The board can choose to look at the budget separate from any change in insurance, so that at least the transparency that you're talking about, Sean, is there.
What does the town do?
What's that?
What does the town's got the same budget year? What do they do?
No. The town's on a different plan cycle. They're on the state partnership plan.
When
they don't get their number.
Their fiscal's the same.
Oh,
when
okay.
they were on the same plan as us, Rob, they were in the same situation.
100%.
Board of Selectmen would
And that's
approve
why
their
Rudy used
budget
to yell
going
at
to
me
the
all the
Board
time.
of Finance with an assumed number, and the actuals wouldn't come in until around Board of Finance vote time.
But almost 100% of the time, those actuals will be lower than the not to exceed number.
So there's a question about which is more transparent, in my mind. In transparency, you could say that it's transparent to say this is our not to exceed number, and it might come down less than this, and we don't know. Or we can say this is our not to exceed number, and we're guesstimating it's going to come down to this other number. I'm not sure which is more transparent in my mind.
Or you could just set up a policy that says this is the not to exceed number. The voters have voted on this as a very large line item for the budget. It is not allowed to be reallocated. Any savings associated with this as a result of differences in actual versus estimated goes back to the voters because it's an insurance line item. That's what it's meant for. It's not meant for building a new building or creating more jobs or anything. It's meant to pay the insurance of the people that are on our staff. And we have an obligation to do that. That's part of their benefits, and we shouldn't shirk them. And I do sort of agree that, you don't want to get in a situation where we're unfunded. But at the same time, I don't agree this should be part of a carryover. And I don't agree that we should be able to reallocate it because it is a very distinct and very large line item. Yeah. So the easy way to solve for this is the timeline can be whatever the timeline is. But whenever there's a variance that's positive to the district, you don't get it. You don't get it to reallocate. Full stop. There's a policy against that.
Well, that actually builds off of what Jonathan was saying, is that you work out the school budget separate from the insurance, and the insurance is what the insurance is.
No, but it's not really separate. It's the same way we've been doing it. It's just
not the way that you're viewing it
for anything else.
Right, but the way that you're viewing it is.
Yeah, but how do we put that to voters in a way that makes can work?
Well, we have the numbers.
The variance goes back into the kitty for next year. It goes back to the voters at the end of the year.
We have insurance numbers before the vote goes to the town.
Can I just bring up something? As a Board of Education, you're not allowed to carry over a reserve.
Right.
that goes back to the town.
That's right.
So
But we are
any
allowed
money
to
that you have
transfer
goes
at
back.
the end of the year, Rob, which is what happens every single month is especially toward the end of the year, all of a sudden, and exactly what Sean's trying to talk about, which is, oh boy, we have $1 million. Let's go get our wish list done. That's what I'm talking about. So it says nothing to do with a carryover. This has to do with reimbursing the town for a large line item that they expected to need and didn't. Not using that money for something they didn't vote on it for. That's all. So please, that's not what I said. Please do not think anything I said had anything to do with carryover. I actually suggested we have a policy that returns that money from any positive variance for insurance over to the taxpayers who committed to spend that on our employees.
But just to clarify, Liz, we do have a solid number for insurance prior to any vote going to the town.
But not our vote, and we have no way to amend that.
Yes, we do.
How do we amend our vote before it goes to the town?
Motion to amend.
Did we have that ability in this budget cycle? Because I must have missed the meeting.
I will send all Robert's rules. I'll make sure that everybody has the ability to do that. Yes, so there's the ability to move to amend, but we had that done for us by the Board of Finance.
That's not
My concern isn't the timing, guys. It's the transfer rules that all of a sudden you have $500,000 that doesn't get used on insurance and $20,000 charges come in and take it for other things. That is an inappropriate use of funds regardless of who and when they were voted on.
Liz, in the past, we've always tried to keep the insurance line separate from most of the, and that's.
Tried to is not policy, Dawn. Tried to is not policy.
There was a time 3 years ago where $1 million in insurance savings showed up at the end of the year to save the day on a large deficit. That should never have happened.
I wasn't here for that.
I know you weren't, but it did happen, and it was.
And that's why it needs to be policy, Dawn. That's why I'm saying this isn't on you guys individually.
I'm not disagreeing with you, Liz.
Broken policy.
I think we're getting a bunch of things combined together here. Maybe we should just move it back to Rob and insurance and the timeline, and we can talk further over the course of the year as to how we want to handle the insurance.
Can I make a suggestion, Jonathan?
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I make a suggestion? So every quarter we give Dawn a report and we go over some of the claim numbers. Maybe the October meeting for the board, we come in, we sit down and say, okay, here's how we're running coming into budget season. Here's what we're seeing. Don't be surprised if Anthem's initial out the door number is XYZ. We will look at it, but here's where we're projecting the claims as of right now. However, we need to adjust or put a back-end protection for any high claimants or other claims fluctuation in there so that you have a slight number for your initial budget number. Because again, you have so many months of claims that you have to account for. And I'll put that in the trend number and I will walk you through how we do the budget projection line by line. And I did that a couple of years ago also with the board so they can see how it's made up and why the numbers come out high at first, but then they drop down. So
or not.
I think that would, or not, you know, it could go the other way. I just, again, for your example, we've had good claims experience in the last 2 years, really good. So we're trying to balance that out with, okay, what do we have if we have a catastrophic claims? You can actually have somebody with $100,000 in pharmacy and $300,000 in medical claims. So you better be prepared for that. And that's part of what we have to put in place so that we're protecting the back end of the board's budget so that if that does happen 6 months down the road, you have the money to cover it.
Rob, is there an actual cutoff when you give us your final number?
When you say cutoff on date time-wise or dollar?
When I say I need my drop dead number, like when is that?
So it's when you tell me, because then I get the snapshot of the claim specific to that date. And that's when we go in and we build out a model.
Right. But no, that doesn't really work, right? Because that would be Sean's wish. When I told you, then you would give it to me. So there's a time where you say, this is the number. It worked out this
Yep.
way this year, but when
Yep.
is that, when is that date? Like, is it April 1st, March 1st? So
Okay,
that,
good point. Yep. So I understand what you're saying. So the schedule would be, we're going to start the process in October. Our initial number will come to you November. That's just a working number. It's no worse.
yeah.
We
the
will
drop
update
dead
that number in, yeah, we'll update that in December saying, hey, we're trending positively or negatively. We'll update it again in January. That's when you as a total board will start to get into those numbers. However,
The last date, when I say I absolutely need the number because I'm going to my Board of Finance, I cannot go there with a wishy-washy number. When is
and that's
that?
usually the third week of February, correct? So
No, when we go to the Board of Finance is usually in March or end of March, April. We're at the Board of Selectmen, the first or second week in March.
Rob, don't worry about our schedule. When
Yeah,
does the insurance company give you
Exactly.
our-
When do we have to sign the policy saying this is what our increase is going to be for this year?
I usually have you sign it in April.
When
what?
does the insurance company give us the final number?
The insurance company gives the final number is based upon the negotiations my office has with them. That final number is usually done the last week of March, first week of April.
Can it be done sooner?
It can be, but you could potentially be leaving dollars on the table that I could negotiate down.
But that works both ways though, Rob. It could also go up.
We could have a bad month or a
Right.
good
A
month.
bad
for
month
last
or a good month. So that goes both ways.
Right. Right. It does
So-
go both ways.
So if we
100% right.
if we
If the-
decided we wanted to have that final number the 1st of February, that's something we could do.
You could, I don't recommend it at that point because again, I'm building in trend, medical cost inflation for the month of February, March, April, May, and June. That's a lot of trend to leave into that number. Okay, so you don't want to leave all that trend in there. You want to cut it back one additional month and maybe another second month.
Right. But again,
And leave
trend
maybe
doesn't
3 or 4 months.
trend doesn't always go down. Sometimes it goes up. So
Trend doesn't go up. It always goes down, right?
Okay.
Because
Wow.
when you're using trend, you're getting closer to that anniversary period. So I want to knock that trend down as much as possible. It doesn't go up. It stays where it is and drops as we get
if
closer.
the anniversary period is now the 1st of February, that's always going to be the trend. So it's going to be the same thing. We're going to feel it perhaps in this particular year. But if it's now 1st of February every year, what's the difference in that process? You're still going to have the same trend. It's still going to go down the same amount.
Just historically, I get what you're saying. We're going to go, we could go down, but claims could level off and trend could just stay flat. But it always goes down as you get closer to your plan anniversary period. The only time it's going to have a negative impact is if claims go up, but we've already built in for that. So you're fine there. If you want it in February, we can do it and budget it in February. I don't recommend it because it is going to be a higher number than you need to take.
Okay, but ultimately, Rob, what you're saying is the Board of Education can determine what that drop dead date is, February, March,
Yes.
April. And if they would like it, let's just say hypothetically speaking, in advance of the Board of Selectmen and or the Board of Selectmen recommendation, the Board of Finance meeting, you could give us that number at that time. I think that's what we're
Yes, I
asking.
can.
Okay, and then
Yes, I
from
can.
there, we can decide what makes the most sense. Jonathan's idea, Liz's idea, whoever idea, but at least if we know that,
Same idea.
then we can move forward. Yeah.
Combined.
Yes.
Sean's idea.
Okay. Is there any more right now for Rob talking about our insurance policy? We got we're running tight. We have about 10 minutes.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you,
Yes,
Rob.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much, Rob. Do
All
we?
right, I'm going to leave you with one thing.
Okay.
Even though we have wrapped up the negotiations, our number is our number. We are continuing to work with Anthem on a rate cap for future years. Okay, so that's something that we haven't settled or finalized, but we're going to give you a absolute no worse than number for future years so that you'll know well in advance. Because when this came up, I'm saying to myself, okay, they need some guarantees, maximum increase. I can't give that to you until I get Anthem to say, hey, we're not going to give you an increase more than 8, 9, 10%, right? Because it could go up crazy amounts. Like I said, 25% increase for one regional school district. So we're still working on that, but that doesn't impact our rate. What it will do is cap our maximum liability for next year. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks
So,
again,
Any
Rob.
other questions?
Thank
Yes,
you.
thank you so much, Rob.
Thank you. And you'll direct me as to when you would want this, and I'll make sure we deliver it. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you, Rob.
Bye-bye.
And Jonathan drops. I actually had a question. So we're not obviously going to have time to get through the next 4 items on our agenda
here.
in 10 minutes. So how does that work?
I think Wes just has to talk really, really fast.
All right, let's go, Wes.
Go Wes.
And the financials are really quick too, because they really haven't changed a lot and I can get it over in
All
a
right,
sentence.
Let's do it.
So
You,
Wes is just providing a very quick update. As you know, technology has been a bit of a struggle, and the world semiconductor shortage isn't lessening that struggle, and that's a real thing. I thought it was all pretend, just so you know. Thought it came out of a cartoon, but
It
Wes
is
is
not
gonna-
pretend.
I know.
Oh no.
And Wes is going to describe the teacher side and the student side, and potentially if we have the ability to financially support it, where we might be. Again, that's even if we can access the resources. So go ahead, Wes.
Can everyone see my screen?
Yep.
All right, I'm going to go really quick. I'm going to skip some things. You've had this since last Friday. So this slide was me covering our new initiative for student one-to-one Chromebooks, K through 3, as early technology skills. It's not going to be one-to-one, and then the rest is one-to-one. For more information, refer back to the curriculum meeting we had last week. This here, I know this looks a little funky, but this is our new proposed yearly Chromebook cycle. In previous ideas, we were going to start giving 4th graders brand new Chromebooks, and then they would keep them for basically 9 years. These things are $300 devices. If you're lucky to get 5 years out of them, that's really, really amazing. We're looking at a 6th to 9th graders get new Chromebooks every year. We're hopefully going to be able to start this cycle this upcoming school year. Really hoping we can do that. This way we can ensure one-to-one across the district, and I feel the aged Chromebooks are matched with developmentally appropriate behaviors, if I can say that very quickly. And again, I'm sure I'll be back at other board meetings to describe this in more detail, but at the end, things will be fully recycled. Moving on to the even more immediate need is the teacher Chromebooks. This is an older slide I gave back in March 22nd meeting. The one that is highlighted in the bold red is the teacher unit that will be aged out of the Google product shelf this June. That means while we're doing our bridge program, ending the school year and running curriculum for the summertime, all teacher computers will no longer be getting updates or direct services from Google, which means things will just stop working. Google Meet, other products within the Google lineup. So I have been, with my awesome tech crew, working as hard as we can to stress test and find the next teacher replacement unit. And the world semiconductor shortage has been a real fun ride. We also, I believe Liz Flogly asked a question on March 22nd about like how comfortable people were with the Google platform. I did these surveys, pre-K all the way through 12. Most people are very comfortable with the Google platform. We're sticking with it for now. Also, it is a great cost savings and we don't really have to provide PD for it. But then looking into the actual devices themselves, we've been getting a lot of different devices in to test. We've been doing a lot of surveys with these teachers that are testing. This is just a small example. One thing we've noticed with this current unit, this is just one of many, is it had great visuals, great keyboard, but the connectivity was terrible. It had very, very poor Wi-Fi card and really bad performance because of the semiconductor shortage. They're putting really crummy chips in these computers and they're running very slow. We've narrowed it down to 3 candidates, the Acer, the Samsung, and the Dell Latitude. Right now, the Dell Latitude is our front runner. It seems to be the highest performing model, has the best level of connectivity, and it has the most availability, we think we can get it within a reasonable time frame. And I do have a little time for questions. I hope that was quick enough. Look at that, 4 minutes.
That was pretty quick. These are all 14-inch and 4 gigs of RAM, or
8 gigs of RAM. The reason that we want to do 8 gigs because when you host Google Meets or there are new plugins for things like Google Sheets and stuff that really eat up the RAM. So
well, the RAM in some cases is more important than the processor itself. Yep. So
absolutely
I'm happy to hear that.
And the other student Chromebooks we're looking at are the same as the ones we got to do the ESPA testing. So then that means I'm really big on equity between buildings. I don't want like one school ending up with the nicer, newer Chromebooks versus the other one. So if we're able to lock that into, I'm able to get that. But it's been quite the hunt, I must say.
Do we know what percentage of high schoolers are going to bring their own devices? Roughly?
We have a rough guesstimate of the surveys we gave this past year, and it was about 40% of people BYOD. But they also had access to really crummy Chromebooks, to be honest. So next year, when we start the cycle, we can offer the 9th and then the other grades Chromebooks. We'll see what that is. And I do think it'll be similar. I think especially juniors and seniors are really using their own devices. It seems like 9th graders and 10th graders are like 80% using the school device. And by the time they're senior year, it's much more in the other direction. But we are doing full one-to-one, full managed devices, grade 4 through 8, and there's a lot of disciplinary reasons and other reasons because of that.
Now, sorry.
Wes, what's the cost for the teachers' devices?
The current front runner, which has been running really well in the test, is about $770 per unit. That is including with a 3-year warranty, full parts replacement. So that is going to average out to about $470K for that.
And we're expecting to get 3 years out of these or 5?
I would like, and this is where another meeting, hopefully next fall, is I would like to start inventing or putting into the budget a product cycle. So like this year will be the year that only high school gets replaced. So we can have we don't have to do this ever again. I want to end this nightmare. And I want to have new technology in the district always, but in reasonable chunks. So I would love to get 3 years out of these, but I could totally get 5 years out of them for that last wave of, let's say now it's the elementary school at the end or high school, however, which we do. And that's why I'm building these. Well, I literally had to source the parts with Dell to make these and Acer these. So it's been a rigmarole.
I know it's not easy, but no, I like the idea of handing those down to elementary or whatever. I think
I don't want to get a 4th grader a brand new machine.
No, I get it. That's
awesome. And what's the price of the student machine? So we have $470,000 for the teacher devices and the student devices.
The student devices that's a little more fluid, but we're looking at about $200 to $300 or $280 to $300 per student device. I might be able to get 750 of the devices. So we're looking hovering around like 270,000. And that with that second wave of student devices, so pretty similar to the last ask, because we're getting the same units, that would get us started on this cycle. And then we can start planning from years on to just revamp 6th and 9th grade and then do our cycle.
I don't want to delay things, but Dr. D, there's a beyond ESSER, there's a ton of funding for Chromebooks. I know we don't have a huge Title I population, but maybe we investigate using some of that funding. I think it's $250 towards each Chromebook, and there's a lot of funding hitting on 4G access points, all sorts of stuff for access. So
I have
a way to exploit it.
Yeah, and I Ken, just so you know, I did ask Jonathan, we can delay strategic planning if we need to for a few minutes, and I also let John Mansfield know to let that group know.
Yeah.
So multitasking, but Sean, to answer your question, we actually had received from the State Department, I think I may have mentioned it, like several different grants. I went on every webinar, inquired about every single one, and we weren't eligible for any. That said, and they were actually really most people. In fact, it was a lot of money, and most districts were not eligible. Those districts that were like regional districts or very rural districts that didn't receive funding through ESSER 1, 2, or 3. That said, first of all, I know that the problem is, Wes, you're not even sure if you can get the devices. The
Yeah.
second challenge is financially. I don't know if we can even pick up any of this. We're not sure if we can pick up. Depends on the timing, right? Because
Yep.
these devices, we need them by June 1. But timing wise, financially, if we're able, we'd like to be able to purchase them. And at some point, we'll speak to the board probably on the 24th, asking permission to do so. But if we're not able to fund it in this year's budget, then we hope, Sean, to answer your other part of the question, that we would be able to use some grant funds that we are getting through to purchase the remainder, because we need them. So ultimately, to get us on a traditional cycle, but more importantly, to have kids what they need, in fact, kids to have what they need and faculty to have what they need when they need it, which is really now. So those are the two pieces, and why I asked Wes to come and present tonight, so that the committee has a framework of why we're moving along as quickly, and we may need to move in a more urgent way if the devices become available to us.
The guy got cameras. He can get Chromebooks. He'll find them somewhere. I'm not worried about that. But I like the idea of life cycling these finally. I think we were a little too loose with it when we rolled this stuff out.
Yeah, there was no plan with it, like the teacher ones, to let them go to almost 8 years.
Yeah.
It was, yeah. So we're going to be putting plans in place. So I'm hoping in the fall, that nice, like the Chromebook thing you saw, we're going to have a nice one for teacher classroom tech, office tech. So it's a reasonable, predictable budget.
As it should be.
Yep. Any other questions? Oh, that was easy.
All right, shall we,
yeah.
Ms.
Yeah,
Norton,
you got the easy
2.5
group.
minutes.
Yeah.
Thanks, Wes.
Okay.
Thank you, Wes, very much.
Thank you.
Not a whole lot going on with the financials. They haven't changed a lot. We are started the final part of our fourth quarter. Right now, I'm still showing a projection that we will be using all of our funds. Most of the funds will be used to cover the COVID that we have. We have not received, but are anticipating getting in the next week or two the second half of the ECR reimbursement, the excess cost reimbursement. We'll be watching for that, and that is kind of a decider as to how much that money is, as to where all of our transfers are going to go. I do have before you a few transfers, and we started looking at truing up the salary accounts, and we are truing it up by elementaries, all in between all the elementaries, in between the high school, special education, and PPS. And then on the other side of the transfers you see there is our $450,000 negative that we have to cover every year because it is budgeted for turnover. There was some middle schools that were underfunded, so we took from the high school, or not, I did it in total. I can break it out more if we need to. It's just a lot of different lines. If you look at all the individual salary lines in your book, you'll see where all the salary accounts are. And then the technology, we trued up that technology area with the transfer, with the variations and the changing throughout the year with management there. And then a little bit in general services. Other than that, it's pretty much the schools, what you had seen last year for Farmingville and East Ridge. They were a little bit behind in getting their transfer request to us. And then the high school was looking at doing some transfers, as well as, well, they were doing transfers both in April, and then they had one in May. And that's pretty much to just cover some year-end concerts and stuff that are going on. So they're pretty self-explanatory. Hopefully the information is clear enough. If not, I can certainly get more information on that. As for COVID, the only changes in COVID pretty much were the salaries. One big change that you'll see on there is curriculum was holding a $50,000 software that we were going to use for one of the for the ESSER 1 grant, and that software didn't materialize. So I moved that 50,000 into the technology line out of the curriculum line. So you'll see curriculum went down and technology went up. And then we're looking at using some of the purchase that we have for the ViewSonic boards for distance learning against that grant, as opposed to the software that we just never went forward with. And then other than that, salaries increased it. Both of the grants that we have there, we've drawn down 100% of the COVID relief funds. We drew down all but $1,000 on the ESSER 1 grant. We'll be drawing the rest of that down in May. May 20th is our next draw. So by the end of the year, both of those will be drawn down. And then as ESSER 2, should that start up again in this year, I'll add that to the list so that everybody has an idea. Any questions?
Thank you, Dawn. Does anyone have any questions? All right. Thank you very much. And I just killed a budget there. All right. So if there are no more questions, I think we can adjourn and go to our next meeting, which some of these same people are going to be in. So
Marathon.
do we need to have a motion to adjourn? May I have one? Liz. Okay, second.
To adjourn.